Best to start with some of the background, which is the Cathari heresy that was going on in this time. Another name is the Albigensians. And the Albigensians, or the Cathari, are a heretical sect that flourished in southern France as well as northern Italy. So this is really in the same location as the Waldensians, Peter Waldo, that we've talked about already. So this is during the 12th and 13th century. The Cathari, they reject the authority of the church. They reject the sacraments of the church. They have a dualistic worldview where there is a God of the good and there is a God of the evil. And those gods, in a sense, equal in power, are fighting for control on earth. They believe that evil is responsible for the physical realm. And they condemn wealth. They point out the clerical corruptions of the time. And they were against force, but decided that the Christian life was one of simplicity and purity. So we hear those things, and there's good things and there's not good things. They're very similar to the Gnostic heresies of the early church with the dualistic worldview. And they're very similar in this time period. You remember the phrase Lady Poverty. Lady Poverty is the idea that the church is called to live a very simple and poor life, and that's really the height of spiritual existence. Now, the Cathari divide their sect between what they call the perfects and the believers. So the perfects are those that have fought this spiritual battle and are abstaining from things like meat and possessions and marriage, things that the Apostle Paul warned would be problematic in the life of the church. And the believers are those that show the Cathari support. So they are, in this time period, a threat to the church because their life of simplicity is attracting many. Now, remember, the Waldensians have this simple life. Lady Poverty is something the Waldensians elevated. And then in reaction to the Waldensians, the Franciscans are elevating Lady Poverty. So the world, in a sense, is looking on. The medieval world is looking on, and they're seeing that the church is corrupt by things like power and wealth, and that these are becoming problematic at the beginning of the 13th century. Now, the popes tried sending in preachers, and they were ineffective until Dominic. So Dominic de Guzman, in 1206, he was helping in efforts to convert the Albigenses and realized that the papally assigned preachers were depending on ecclesiastical pomp and dignity. The Albigensians considered such a show a sure sign of false religion, and Dominic believed that heretics would listen if the preachers themselves were committed to poverty. To win heretics, Dominic went forth among them as a poor man, barefoot and begging. So he is looking at this call for this heresy to be put away, and the heretics see the value of living a poor life according to the gospel, and he sees the church, the Pope, sending in those that would interact with the heretics, and they're being sent in like a royal court. And the heretics are seeing that as something that is absolutely hypocritical and antithetical to the gospel. So this is really part of what begins to drive Dominic. So we have the 13th century, the very beginning of the 13th century, We have heresy on the rise. We have the Waldensians that are sort of proto-reformers. We have Lady Poverty being a spiritual ideal that's sort of in the zeitgeist of the culture. We have very poor preaching. Remember, we looked at Francis's preaching, and everyone loves Francis, and then you look at his preaching and you're kind of like, back off from it. We have corruption and the need for reformation. Remember, Fourth Lateran Council seeking to reform, Innocent III seeking to be a reformer, and that's sort of the state of the church. So Dominic is born into this as the state of the church. So who is he? One historian says he seems to not have been nearly so colorful a figure as Francis. So we looked at Francis, and there's lots of really exciting things that go on with Francis. Dominic is kind of boring, kind of an academic, focused on preaching, focused on living a simple life. And the contrast is like night and day between Francis and Dominic. But there's still interesting things, and he's still very, very important in the life of the church. So who is he? He's born in Castile, in Spain, in Valencia, and he's born to a very wealthy family. His family, as the Guzmans, they own a castle, they own a tower, they're able to see over the whole of the countryside. They were well known in the community, and it's noted that the poor are often coming to their home, and they're seeking food, and they're seeking wine, and they're seeking shelter. And Dominic's mother, whose name is Juana or Joan, depending on if we want to go with Spanish or an anglicized version, Juana is someone who cares for the poor as they come, even as a very wealthy woman. A few things about Juana is that we're told that she dreamed of a dog leaping from her womb, carrying a flaming torch in its mouth. And she saw that this would be Dominic. He would be the canine of the Lord that comes forward with this torch, or the light of the gospel. There is also, as I mentioned, the story of her caring for the poor. She's noted for for their care for those who are poor, and also at his baptism. Some stories say it's Juana, others say that it's the godmother who's there at the presentation of Dominic. But at his baptism, a star appears on his forehead. And if you look at medieval art, there's always little clues. Who is that guy? They all kind of look alike, right? They have similar features. If he has a star on the forehead, that's Dominic, because it represents that star that allegedly appears during his baptism. Now he studies at the University of Palencia. Valencia is how we say that today. And during his studies, his undergraduate studies, and then on to study further, there's this great famine that comes upon Valencia, and people are starving and people are dying. And Dominic is noted as saying, "I cannot bear to prize dead skins," which are parchments, "when living skins are starving." So he pulls away from his studies, and he wants to serve the poor. And in that service, he ends up being ordained in Osma, and he is ordained as an Augustinian. Remember, Fourth Lateran Council forbids any new orders. He's not allowed to become the Dominican. They're not allowed to become the Dominicans. They have to choose an order. So Dominic, in the founding of this order, is an Augustinian, and he's going to build on that and become the Dominicans. Now, what's interesting about a man who dedicates his ministry to preaching being an Augustinian? Remember, all of the great reforms of the church happened through those that claim to be Augustinian. That's true in the ancient church, starting with Augustine himself. And as that order advances through time and takes on different looks, because of the commitment to the Word of God, reformations come from the Augustinian order. And that's true in what we would say the Protestant Reformation, 1517, Luther as an Augustinian. It's true in the medieval period. It's true in the ancient period. So that's interesting that he is an Augustinian. He refuses 2 bishoprics in his time. He doesn't want to be a bishop. He doesn't want power and authority. He wants to serve. He's noted as being stern with himself and a strict ascetic. So he has these disciplines that are very common to the monastery. But he's also noted as being a man that is prayerful and joyful and gentle and pure in his decisions for his order. The black outer garment representing discipline, and the white representing purity. And often in paintings of Dominic, he's holding a lily, and that lily is a representative of purity. That's an Easter lily that he's holding in the painting. Now, so this is some of who Dominic is, and remember the context is Cathari. So the context is heresy on the rise, the church being abused in a sense through heresy. So Dominic wants to do something. And what he wants to do is he wants to go and he wants to preach. Now, among the Cathari, Dominic saw how ineffectual a bishop and 3 sister monks were. These ecclesiastics traveled with a retinue of servants and all the pomp of high office, a fact which did nothing to dissuade the people from following those who had adopted the apostolic life, even though they were doctrinally suspect. So what Dominic does is he sees that as problematic. If you want to win these people, the Apostle Paul would say you become all things to all people. So if those that value poverty and being barefoot and living on nothing, that's the way to go to them. You don't go to them with crowns and pomp and circumstance. So Dominic goes to them, and part of Dominic in going and founding an order is that he possesses rare gifts that are often used in the life of the church in an extraordinary way. He is both a preacher who is a good orator, able to convince, but he's also an organizer. He's somebody who's able to gather people and organize his order. Now, think on all of life and those 2 gifts, abilities to persuade and abilities to organize, are often not held by the same people. That's why we need each other in the life of the church, and that's why businesses flourish when these 2 gifts come together, or families need these different gifts together. But often, or occasionally in the life of the providence of God, somebody comes to the front who's both gifted in both oratory skills and organizational skills. And Dominic is among them. And part of that organization is that he forms among the brothers. He has something of a democratic style about the way he organizes the Dominicans, and also is a preacher of note from what we know. Now, he focuses on education. Remember, he pulls out of university because of the poverty of the time, but that doesn't mean that he's rejecting education. He actually has a very, very high view of education. He is trained in liberal arts and theology in Palencia in the 1180s, and then that famine hits, that's 1191, that's when he pulls himself out and experiences this new calling. He abandons his studies at that point and founds the preaching order. So the Dominicans are called the Order of Preachers. That's what they are called to do. And he is interested in seeing the advancement of preaching and the advancement of Christian scholarship connected to that preaching. Now, this is important for us because we're working towards the Reformation. And we're looking for these little pieces that come together in the history of the church that lead to Reformation. The Reformation didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't like the church is corrupt for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and all of a sudden Martin Luther's born and the church changes. It's not how history works. It's not how providence works. There are little things that are occurring, and one of them is Dominic sending out those that focus on preaching, that focus on the Word of God, rightly or wrongly, in his abilities to interpret, and also the high view of scholarship that's regained from Dominic and what he brings. One said that he realized the need for an educated clergy, able to communicate with all the people through sermons. He founded the new order, recognized in 1220, emphasized the friars' calling to teach and preach, and hence the Dominicans' official title, the Order of Preachers. And they spread through Europe as watchdogs of the Lord. So their focus is on preaching and teaching, and it begins with Aristotelian philosophy. So this is something that the ancient church did as well. Instead of founding the Christian faith on the Word of God like good Westminster Presbyterians that have chapter 1 as the Bible and chapter 2 as God, they follow the ancient procedure of having God as the first starting point and the way that we come to God following Aristotelian theology, or philosophy, I should say. In that, the Dominicans produce someone we're going to soon look at, who becomes the absolute star of medieval theology, and that is Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas is an Augustinian, is a Dominican trained in Paris, and we see Notre Dame Cathedral, and that's his school. That's where he is his teaching. In this education, they're giving broad liberal arts education, and they believe that philosophy and liberal arts are important for preaching. Now, this is novel in the late 1200s, and for all of us, it seems obvious. Like, that is what we do. We send those that want to enter the ministry often to get a liberal arts education and then some sort of training in divinity so that they're able to put all of that together. Dominic is thinking in these lines and useful towards that end. The academic emphasis is very intellectual in comparison with the Franciscans. Remember, the Franciscans are, in a sense, anti-intellectual, and the Dominicans go into cities, and they establish schools of theology at the center of the city. So they find Center City, they establish schools of theology, which grow up into being cathedrals and cathedral schools, and they teach the church, and they raise up those who have intellectual gifts. So the Dominicans were from the outset committed to scholastic theology. In order, cultivated the study of theology above all else. To concentrate on this, they abolished the requirement for monks to do manual labor, which until this time had been an essential feature of monastic life. Their preaching and teaching did much to help keep the people of Western Europe loyal to the Roman Catholic faith, especially in the cities. So this is the work that's going on, and we see that universities of Paris and universities in Oxford and in Bologna and in Rome, they become centers where professors are the Dominicans. And this leads to the Franciscans saying, maybe we should teach our men things as well. And you look at Catholic universities or the old historic universities from the medieval period, and you'll see both Dominicans and Franciscans teaching there. But that's not the way that it was. It was the Dominicans were the educated ones and the ones that were promoting education. Now, through Dominic, one historian said that he put excitement back into scholarship. You think of this time period coming out of that period called the Dark Ages and into this high medieval period. And in the high medieval period, separated from the Dark Ages, scholarship becomes something important. You guys know I'm a book nerd. You know that I look at books that are expensive, like disgustingly expensive. This next week, November 5, 6, and 7, is the Boston Antiquarian Book Society sale. And I was looking through the catalog, and it is awesome. There are books of hours that are for sale from this period. There is a New Testament that has marginal notes that Thomas Aquinas himself wrote in the margin. And we're talking things like $150,000, $250,000. Amazing things. But those books come out of this period. You don't look at antiquarian books and see like books from the 700s, 800s, and 900s. They existed, but they were super rare. But books during this period are beginning to find their way around Western Europe, and people are reading again, and people are thinking about things in different ways. And intellectualism is on the rise in this time period. So he puts excitement back in. Paul? These are all handwritten at this point. So it's late 1400s when the printing press happens. And something interesting, when Gutenberg happens, books are being printed in a similar fashion, and then they're handed over to monks who illustrate them. They're not doing just like straight printing press. They're printing press, and then they're illustrated so that people recognize the technology of the time. So one way that Dominican study is understood is this. This is Hugh of St. Cher, who is a Dominican. He said that first the bow is bent in study, and then the arrow is loosed in preaching. And that's a great quote. That's a quote that Reformed men and women can get behind as a truth. Now, there is a biography written of Dominic, and that biography is called Lives of the Brethren of the Order of Preachers, and it has vignettes or biographies from the year 1206 to 1259. So it begins with Dominic's parents, and then biography of Dominic himself, and then it goes through other notable Dominicans early on. And that is an important book in understanding the life of Dominic, but it's also something that we have to read with discernment, because there's funny things that go on in medieval biographies. We call it hagiography, a holy biography. And in a hagiography, you always want to show the person to be holier than than they were in real life. So funny things happen. Like there's an example of his mother giving away wine to the poor people in the community, and his father was not very happy about that. She's giving his wine away, and through prayers of Dominic, that wine cask is able to miraculously refill overnight, which shows the Lord's approval of his mother's behavior. So these are the sort of things you get in medieval biography. And cool stories, but let's admit that's not really something that happened. So from his biography, we're told that the order is founded by the prayers of the Virgin Mary. Oh, we hate that, don't we? So the rosary is very closely connected to Dominic as a starting point. Your friends that are going through the rosary beads and they're telling you that you should join the church that never changes, that didn't show up until pretty late in the game as a thing. The biography has a collection of miraculous events compiled by early Dominicans, as the one that I noted, and I'll tell you another one later. And the biography of Dominic is put together by two or more, but what's important is that it is put together by contemporaries of Dominic. Some biographies, medieval biographies, are written like 100 years after the person lived. This is written by those that knew him. So we can't look at it and just be like, this is all nonsense, this is all made up. These are men that worked with Dominic. They would have known him. And there's stories of raising the dead, expanding the wine. There's stories of bread coming down from heaven. His tunic at one time was used to stop a fire from happening. There's stories of runaways and him having them reunited with their families. And there's even stories of him going to places on mission where he doesn't know the language and he just starts preaching in their native tongue. We'd say speaking in tongues. These are things that are in the biography. And one of the things that we learn about Dominic is that he owned books and he carried books, right? So his Bible, like here's Connor's Bible up here. You can come claim your Bible whenever you want, Connor. But so that Bible, 66 books are held in that leather case. That's not what a medieval book looks like. The Gospel of Matthew would be like a full folio, this thick on vellum, so it's skin. Each page is skin and handwritten, as noted. So, if you're carrying the Gospel of Matthew, you're carrying a big, giant volume with you. And Dominic was noted for carrying Gospels, letters of the Apostle Paul, as well as books of the ancients like Augustine and others. So as he's traveling, he probably has like a carriage that his library is in. And as one who loves education, loves scholarship, is promoting that, is reading books at the time, this is one of my personal favorite stories. So Dominic is crossing a river on one of his missionary journeys, and his books fall in the river. So he's in the middle of the river, and these books fall into the river. And he was not happy with this, and he was at the time unaware of the loss, and he gets to the house, and it's this woman that lodges him on these missionary journeys, and he tells her of the loss of these books, and she begins to fret, and Dominic comforts the woman. He says, "Grieve not, good mother, for we ought to bear cheerfully every cross it pleases God to send to us." And the next day, we're told in the biography that the fishermen comes to the spot where the books were tossed into the river accidentally, and he casts in his line, and he thinks that he hooks this prize fish, and he pulls out the books. And the books seem as though they've been wrapped in wax. They're not even wet. So miraculously, these books get returned to Dominic, and he is able to continue with them. So that's sort of the stories that you find in medieval biography. Did he lose his books in the river? Maybe. Did a fisherman find them? Maybe. The fact that they're vellum, maybe they dried quickly. I don't know. But the story of this, and even having something of a resurrection motif where the books are under the water for 3 days and they're raised to newness of life. This is the sort of thing that we find in medieval biography. I want to tell you some about his preaching as well, and then we'll move on to really a difficult part of the Dominicans. As the order of preachers, compared with Francis, and seeing the style of Francis, it would be very, very useful for us to examine some of Dominic's sermons. Like, we have some things of Francis, and we were not impressed. We were impressed maybe with his poetry. Maybe if he was like a hippie in the late 60s, we would have been impressed with some of his poetry. But when we come to Dominic as the founder of the order of preachers, we are left wanting, because there are 0 sermons of Dominic's that have survived. Now, why is that? I have no idea. We do have first accounts of his preaching. We have those that have trained under him that in their books or in their sermons make reference, but we don't have, say, a scribe that second-handedly transcribes what he says, and we don't have anything written on his own. Like, maybe you guys have seen Calvin has the big commentary set. Those commentaries, as Calvin is preaching them from day to day in Geneva, there's somebody sitting essentially in the front row just transcribing what's said so that they can be preserved. We don't have that with Dominic. But we do have the Bishop of Toulouse, who said that he was to go forward with moralistic teaching, with doctrinal catechism, explaining the doctrinal truths of the church under the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, and the Ave Maria. So this may be, and probably is, the things that are focused on. But there's also this book that one of Dominic's students wrote. So Hubert of Romans writes Treatise on the Formation of Preachers in the year 1256. So he is a professor of preaching at the University of Paris. So he's going to be one who helps to train Thomas Aquinas, and he is one who is directly connected to Dominic. So he writes this book. You can Google it and find the book in public domain and read some of it. And what we find in the book is that he talks about the preacher's office. He says that a preacher is not somebody who occasionally gives sermons. The preacher is one whose life is formed around the ministry of preaching. So preaching for the preacher is the main task of his life. His life should revolve around the preparation and delivery of sermons. Again, we like that. We like that idea. The teaching elder is set apart for that, we would say. Spiritual formation, intellectual humility, personal piety, moral integrity are things that are focused on. Humbert says that the preacher should be incarnate of the message that he proclaims. So the things that are proclaimed should be consistent in the life of the preacher. We should see zeal for souls. We should see the disciplines of the Christian life, such as prayer and study and self-examination and compassion for the hearers. The preacher must avoid defects such as boasting and laziness and lack of preparation and moral failure and preaching for self-glory rather than the glory of God. And again, we like all this stuff. This is all things that we would appreciate and things that are important because as we've studied this time period in history, think back of Fourth Lateran Council, this is a disaster of a time period in the life of the church. And here Dominic's saying we need education, we need preaching, and we need men that have moral integrity to have the office. He also goes on and he talks about intellectual and theological persuasion. So the preacher should study the scriptures, study moral philosophy and theology, study the art of preaching. He must know both what he's preaching about and how to preach it. And that's a good thing. He emphasizes sermons rooted in scripture and not simply things that are clever or novel. He encourages preachers to adapt their preaching to the audience. You know, if you're preaching to a noble versus preaching to a peasant, those have different styles of preaching. Or if you're preaching to a layman or those who are in religious orders, that should have a different look. He talks about practical preaching, giving advice on preparation, such as choosing a topic and how to structure a sermon and how to use examples, how to make applications, dealing with objections, making sure that the people support his message, and also talking about different contexts. He says preaching to an urban audience versus a rural audience is going to look different. Preaching to secular people versus religious people ought to look different. So he says that preachers have this ethical and moral responsibility in these things, and the preacher must know his flock and speak to their needs and help them to grow in holiness. So in a sense, this becomes the preaching manual of this time. And again, we step back, we love the Reformation, we love to study the Reformation, but again, we often think the Reformation happened in a vacuum, or at least we're not sure what happens that leads to Reformation. Dominic is part of that for the good of the church in the sense that he's putting these things before the church, saying, value these things, go for these things, work toward these things. Humbert said that at the heart of a preacher's teaching, there is his awareness that, strictly speaking, it is only God who makes a man a preacher. His references to the grace of preaching, though few, are extremely important. It is not enough that a man is eager to preach, nor is it enough that he should have received the best possible training. What has to be discerned is what grace of preaching he has. It is this that must be seen as the crucial factor around which both enthusiasm and discipline fall into place. So God equips the preacher. That's what the Dominicans are saying. And again, I don't think there's anything that we disagree with on this. I mean, if we get into the whole book, we'd say, well, this is very medieval, this is Roman Catholic, this is this, and that. But if we look at the bones of the book and the bones of the way the Dominican order is preaching, we like that. These are good things. Now, what don't we like? What we don't like is the Inquisition, right? Somebody has to say nobody expected the Spanish Inquisition. So if you're going to say it now. The Inquisition happens from the 1200s through, guess what year the Inquisition ends? 1834. And the office of inquisitors does not go away from the Roman Catholic Church until 1908, when it is replaced with the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. So those that are the bulldogs, and you remember, was it 3 popes ago, we had a bulldog who's an inquisitor, a German inquisitor, and in the line of that office. So the Inquisition happens. One said that the Inquisition could amputate but not heal. So they're looking for heretics. They're looking for those that are going against the teaching of the church. And the preaching of the Dominicans had some, but not a very great success in winning heretics back to the church. And so various church councils decided in no small measure to use force. The church began to persecute heretics, and the Inquisition was introduced with the Dominicans in charge of it. So the need for Inquisition happens, and the Pope says, who are we going to put in charge of this? And in a sense, you put the best apologists in charge, the ones that are the educated clergy, so it makes sense that the Dominicans are put in charge so that they can use reason and argument to win the heretics. But when that did not happen, they were authorized and even encouraged to use force. So the need for the Inquisition, in the positive sense, is that the church going out and preaching against heretics and winning them back to the truth. So the truth of the Scriptures, not necessarily the truth of medieval the Roman Catholic Church, but if the Inquisition is merely intellectual debate and discussion and winning those that have left, there's value in that. But when the Inquisition becomes punitive and the Inquisition becomes something where force is used, that is inappropriate. You know, in Reformed theology, we talk about the keys of the kingdom and the sword. The church has the keys. The magistrate has the sword. The church does not use the sword, and the magistrate is not called to use the keys. And yet, here in this time, those things come together. So in 1220, the Pope takes the Inquisition from the hands of the bishops, turns it over to the Dominicans. 9 years later, at a synod, policies are put in place, leaving heretics with no rights. The inquisitor was subject to no law, only the Pope himself. He was prosecutor and judge. The trials were secret. The accused had to prove his innocence, and in all courts following Roman law, without the benefit of counsel or the knowledge of his accusers. So Dominicans became satirized as the dogs of the Lord. Now, if you know Latin, Domini canis, right? The dogs of the Lord, the Dominicans, are those, and then going back to this vision that his mother allegedly had of this dog leaping from the womb, and this is Dominic, and these are the inquisitors that go forward to save the Roman Church in a sense. So the friars would question the suspect. If they discovered heretical ideas, they'd ask him to recant or deny the beliefs. If he recanted, he'd go free. If not, and he persisted, he would be turned over to the officers for punishment because the church does not shed blood. So that continues with the Inquisition, and then for the death of Dominic, he dies on August 6, 1221. In the weeks prior to his death, he is traveling on a preaching assignment. He gets sick with a fever, and on his deathbed, he declined to use a bed. They actually switched his habit so that he could die in dignity, because his habit was noted for being the rattiest of all of the habits that any monk would wear. And then there are several versions of his final words, but this being among them. Have charity in your hearts, Practice humility after the example of Jesus Christ, and make your treasure and riches out of voluntary poverty. You know that to serve God is to reign, but you must first serve him in love and with a whole heart. And that's where we'll stop. So if there's like one burning question, maybe we can do one burning question. Okay, thank you guys for being here.